As you just saw, I'm making a survival game just like every other indie game dev, but it will actually be slightly different as it's a survival shooter game on board a giant vehicle in a frozen wasteland where you have to fight raiders in order to survive. And I know that that sounds a bit like Choo Choo Charles, but I actually started working on this game in the end of August 2022, so that game wasn't out by then, and I'm also not making a horror game. Who am I? I'm a student in Sweden who's been working with Unity off and on, and have now used it frequently for a bit more than 2 years now with varying success. My first project was the classic rollerball game tutorial, which I tried to continue work on, but I was too dumb to actually figure out how. But that was in like 2016, so if we cut forward to 2019, I had a high school project where I recreated the entire school in Unity. But due to not using Git or any other proper backup system, I lost over a month of progress when the project got corrupted. So yeah. Then I didn't use Unity at all because I was just like, yo, fuck this. Until the end of summer 2021 when I started on another survival game, which was intended to be very much like Ark but bigger and better with different design decisions. I spent 2 months making an inventory system, resource and build system, and then I discovered Unity Dots and ECS and I was like, oh wow, it's so cool. And I spent a bunch of time converting all my work to ECS, which took a long time as I had to learn it all. I then added structural stability to the buildings and got the great idea to add in networking and multiplayer, which very quickly spelled the end of that project as it was too difficult to actually make work. In the end of August 2022, I started a university course where we have 2 months to make a game in a game engine of our choice before entering a game competition with the game we'd made. A classmate and I then made the game shown in the beginning of this video, and we actually became a finalist in the game competition. But now for the game, which is, as I've said, a survival first-person shooter game aboard a large vehicle in a frozen wasteland, where you'll be attacked by raiders on your way to the goal. The reasoning for the raiders attacking you is that you are in possession of a large heating or energy apparatus, much like the steam cores in Frostpunk, and they are very scarce. Alternatively, you have the only one that exists, and you have to get this to a colony of survivors to keep them warm from the permanent winter caused by a cataclysmic event. But these raiders also want to keep warm, since they live off rudimentary heating and scraps and therefore want to steal your vehicle or the heating apparatus only, which means that you will have to defend it and yourself from the attacks, which is where the FPS element comes into play, where you can build different turrets, produce ammunition for them, and you yourself can do the shooting in order to defend the vehicle. Currently, I'm just planning on having the player respawn after X amount of time when they die, maybe 10 seconds, so it's not a permadeath. But the game still continues in the background, so you have to hope that the vehicle can keep defending itself until you respawn. And potentially for higher difficulties, perhaps there should be more of a penalty for dying than just time lost, so you maybe lose resources, or the vehicle takes more damage when you aren't alive. However, I've yet to actually implement any of this, so a lot might change when I get to the actual implementation. Now for what's actually been happening. As you can see, it started off very simple. I reused the inventory and resource system that I created for my previous survival game project, and we got a functional vehicle, if you use the term functional and vehicle very loosely, as it's not much to look at, but it was a good prototype. The grey blob at the front of the vehicle is the scoop, which is used to collect resources, where the cubes in front of the vehicle are supposed to be rocks. Inspired by games such as Raft or Frostpunk, or movies and TV shows such as Snowpiercer and Mortal Engines, the game and the vehicle started to take shape. The original plan for the game was a much larger scope than the game we actually finished for the competition, but one of the ideas was actually Factorio on wheels with a tower defense mechanic. Because as you might have seen, I kinda like fighting bugs in Factorio. All of this actually changed because we were like, okay, yeah, let's do this and that, and oh, very big scope. Oh, the deadline is in 1.5 months. Okay, let's just pull back the scope a bit. The first draft of the vehicle was made by my classmate as a sort of size reference and to test out the idea, where the second version looked a lot better and was more in line with the graphical style we wanted. But it wasn't very well optimized as it was a lot of small pieces, so I took the time to combine colliders and simplify the meshes. After we got a nice vehicle going, I followed a very nice brackies tutorial to get some billowing smoke for the vehicle to really get the atmosphere going. Of, you know, the world being frozen over due to the cataclysmic event, and the player's vehicle ravaging the earth, just taking all resources and burning them and just spewing out so much pollution and smoke. Afterwards it was time for the snow deformation, as it had to actually look snowy, which was done by having a particle emitter under the player that spawns circles, which can only be seen by a second camera, which is above the player, which renders to a texture, which then gets sent to a shader for vertex displacement. And then upping the vertex density of the snow mesh near the player provided smoother deformation where the player could see it, but without going overboard with the amount. Add in another particle spawner for the vehicle, which is a lot larger and spawns more slowly since the vehicle moves more slowly, and we got some pretty nice deformation going on. What is a indie game survival shooter without procedural terrain? Which, of course, we had to have. So I created a terrain manager which generated an array with vertices, multi-thread of course, which all the terrain pieces can do a lookup into given their position, and therefore all pieces line up perfectly, and we save performance since each piece only needs to read vertices where only the manager is actually creating these vertex positions. Resource spawning on top of the terrain is done in the very simple way of just creating some allowed bounds to spawn resources inside of, generating random points, raycasting down to the ground and spawning a resource. For more natural looking resources, I added the ability to have a varying distribution of resources with different probabilities and different models, which is currently at a 70-30 distribution of trees and rocks. However, the distribution of resources is very lackluster, as it's a uniform square distribution, which I then changed to be a circular, non-uniform distribution with a higher density near the center of the resource zone, so it looks more natural. And what happens if you then add in a big old snowstorm behind the player that makes you freeze to death if it catches up to you? Well, you kinda got a playable game, easy as that. And that is exactly what we did. And we had like 100 commits in the last 3 days before the deadline. We sent this in and we got like 8th place, 5th place, something like that. However, I continued to work on my game 2 days after the deadline to bring it closer to my original version for the game and increase the scope again and change a lot of stuff, which is why I'm making this devlog series, so I'll actually continue development more regularly and provide some sort of insight into the process of converting my monobehavior game to Unity Dots, which is the data-oriented technology stack, which is very, very cool. This is the end of the devlog 0, but in the following devlogs I will show the conversion process from monobehaviors to ECS, talk about the new functionality I've added, such as being able to shoot 400,000 bullets at 30 FPS.